The Germans called this weapon Stalin's organ, but not because of the music. It was because of the howl that froze soldiers in primal terror. The temperature at the epicenter of the explosion was so intense that rubber dripped from wheels in black puddles, and aluminum engines lost their shape. 7 experimental vehicles. A top-secret classification. Every driver had a detonation cord at hand to blow up their own truck. Surrender was forbidden. They had nowhere to retreat. They were hunted into the swamps like wolves. What happened that night in the village of Bogatyr when the shells ran out? And why, at the site of the battle, did they find not a single intact machine, but only melted skeletons? This is the story of the first strike of the Katyusha. July 14th, 1941, 15:15 hours. The Orsha railway junction. It is not just a station, it is a blood clot in a transport artery, packed to the brim with German iron. Echelons with fuel, flatbeds with tanks, infantry battalions scheduled to move on Smolensk in an hour. The Germans feel like masters. They are not hiding. They smoke, roll up the sleeves of their uniforms and laugh, shouting over the clanking of couplers. The depth of the rear seems to them a guarantee of immortality. For them, the war here is logistics, marching schedules, and a hot lunch. They do not yet know that their lives have already been measured, weighed, and converted into the dry figures of artillery tables. Their time is up. The hands of the clock just haven't caught up with the fact yet. Above the steep bank of the Dnieper, in the dense brush, 7 ZIS-6 trucks sit motionless. This is Captain Ivan Flerov's experimental battery. The men at the positions do not look like poster heroes. They are gray with dust, their tunics soaked in sweat and machine oil. The air hangs heavy with the smell of superheated metal and cheap tobacco. There are no solemn speeches. There is only work. Heavy, dirty, mathematically precise work of destruction. The crews know. In their cargo beds, they carry more than just ammunition. They carry a state secret of the highest category. TNT charges for self-destruction are secured to every vehicle. The instruction is simple and brutal. If the enemy gets close, the battery must turn to dust along with its crews. Captivity is not an option. There will be no surrender. This weighs on the psyche more heavily than the proximity of the front. Flerov looks at the map, then through his binoculars. The target sector is defined. The distance is verified. An error in the angle of even 1,000th at such a range would mean a miss of tens of meters. But right now the target is too big to miss. Orsha Station is one solid target patch. Angle 300. The gunner's voice is hoarse, breaking into a falsetto. Sight 120, another crew member responds. Level. Captain Flerov does not see people. He sees functions. The loader is a shell delivery mechanism. The gunner is a coordination mechanism. The driver is a delivery mechanism. He himself is the trigger. Nerves are taut as the steel cables holding the rails. The M13 rockets look toward the zenith. 132 millimeters of death in every cylinder. These are not just slugs with gunpowder. This is an engineering masterpiece created for area erasure. Inside every shell is nearly 5 kilograms of explosives, ready to shatter into 1,000 fragments. Battery! Flerov's command cuts the hot summer air. Fire! The electric igniter closes the circuit. Current runs through wires to the squibs in the tails of the rockets. And in that moment, physics takes precedence over tactics. 7 seconds. That is exactly how long the salvo lasts. But these 7 seconds change the very concept of war. This is not the familiar thunder of a cannon shot. This is a grinding noise turning into a howl. a sound of such frequency and power that capillaries burst in the noses of men standing nearby, and eardrums refuse to process reality. 112 fiery comets tear away from the rail guides. The ZIS-6 trucks rock on their springs like lifeboats in a storm, dancing on their jacks, pressing their wheels into the soil. Flame scorches the grass for tens of meters behind the launchers, turning the brush into instant charcoal. Smoke blankets everything. Acrid, black smoke from burning nitroglycerin powder. And then this howl falls upon Orsha. Down at the station, no one has time to understand what has happened. There is no whistle of a falling bomb, no puff of smoke from a gun barrel. The sky simply falls to the earth. 112 explosions merge into one continuous roar that shakes the ground for kilometers from the epicenter. This is not shooting at targets. This is the annihilation of a grid square. The M13 rocket produces 135 heavy fragments upon detonation. At a speed of 800 meters per second, these pieces of red-hot steel do not just wound. They turn infantry into biological mints mixed with mud and railway tie splinters. The shrapnel does not fly upward. It sweeps along the ground, mowing down everything alive at the root. The temperature in the epicenter spikes instantly. Fuel tankers detonate, adding thousands of liters of burning gasoline to this hell. Orsha disappears. Instead of a railway hub, there is now a firestorm. Heavy German tanks are flipped by the blast wave like children's toys. Turrets are ripped from their rings, armor plates crack along the welds. Flatbeds with equipment turn into twisted knots of metal. Those in the center vanished immediately, evaporated, disintegrated into atoms. Those on the edges saw the end of the world. The psychological effect is more terrifying than the physical one. Germans who had marched through Europe, who had seen heavy artillery and carpet bombing, fall into an animal stupor. That howl, that damned howl, followed by a wall of fire. They cannot classify the threat. It is not aviation. It is not howitzers. It is something new, outside their understanding of war. A doomsday weapon. At the battery positions, silence rings in the ears. The smoke settles slowly. Men look at each other with wild eyes. Hands tremble, not from fear, but from overexertion and adrenaline crash. They are frightened themselves by what they have just unleashed. 7 seconds ago, this was a quiet grove. Now it is a scorched bald patch smelling of sulfur and burning. "Pack up!" Flerov's voice sounds dull, as if through cotton. There is no time to inspect the results. No time for congratulations. The result is clear from the pillar of black smoke rising over the horizon where the station used to be. Now the survival timer starts. The Germans will recover quickly. The Luftwaffe will scramble squadrons. Artillery will start probing the square. The secret weapon has revealed itself. Now the hunt begins. The most massive hunt in the history of this sector of the front. The mechanics of action are drilled to automatism. Jacks up, covers on the rails. Drivers jump into cabs, cranking engines. The ZIS trucks, still hot from the salvo, growl, spitting exhaust. They need to leave, disappear, dissolve into the forests before German spotters transmit the coordinates of this patch of earth. Flerov casts a final glance toward Orsha. A sea of fire rages there. He understands. The old war is gone. Now war is an engineering process of turning a landscape into a lunar surface. And he is the chief engineer of this process. "Move out!" the captain commands. The column tears away, leaving behind burning grass and the beginning of a legend that will cost them their lives. They have only a few minutes to turn into ghosts. The race with death has begun. The column heads into the forest, and this forest seems not like salvation, but a green labyrinth with no exit. The road under the wheels is not asphalt. It is a mixture of sand, clay, and roots that kills suspensions. The ZIS-6 trucks roar in low gear. The engine's 73 horsepower is catastrophically little for the weight dumped onto the frame. The vehicle is overloaded. The center of gravity is shifted upward because of the massive truss of the launcher. On every turn, the truck lists, threatening to tip into the ditch. Drivers grip the steering wheels until their knuckles are white, feeling with their backs how death sways behind the cab. This is no longer just transport. It is an engineering paradox. On one hand, genius simplicity. Take a rail, weld guides to it, put it on a truck chassis, and you get mobility unavailable to a classic howitzer. On the other hand, it is makeshift fragility. The ZIS-6 is a workhorse of civilian construction sites, not a war chariot. It has no armor. The cab is wood-clad in tin. A burst from a German machine gun will stitch right through it, turning the driver and commander into a sieve along with the dashboard. A mortar shard hitting the gas tank will turn the machine into a torch in seconds. And in the back, in the cargo bed, lie spare rockets. If they detonate, the crater will have to be measured in tens of meters. But the scariest thing is not what might fly in from the outside. The scariest thing is what is secured inside. On the frame of every truck, next to the gas tanks and at the base of the rails, special charges are installed. 2 wooden boxes. Inside is 30 kilograms of pressed TNT. This is not ammo for the enemy. It is an insurance policy for secrecy. The crew commander in the cab has a detonation control box right at hand, or, in the worst case, a fuse cord. The instruction from the People's Commissariat of Defense leaves no room for interpretation. Upon threat of capture, destroy. The crew rides atop a time bomb, where the timer is the distance to German tanks. It is stifling in the cab of the lead vehicle. The smell of gasoline mixes with the smell of sweat and cheap tobacco. The sergeant driver, eyes glued to the rutted track, throws a short phrase to the gunner sitting next to him. It's going hard. Springs are at the limit. If an axle snaps, we're stopped. The gunner, a young guy with a face smeared in soot, glances at the black box under the seat. If we stop, we press it. You gonna press it? The driver shifts gears with a crunch. The truck jerks. Don't you want to live? An order is an order. Flerov said, don't leave the Germans even a nut. Nuts. It'll blow us to nuts. 30 kilos of TNT. Won't even be anything to bury. Just a pit and smoke. They know what they are carrying, but they don't know the weapon's name. The word Katyusha has not been born yet. It will appear later, in letters and legends. Right now, it is an article, a secret index, disclosure of which means execution on the spot. Soldiers from other units look at the column with suspicion. The trucks are always covered with canvas, even at rest stops, even deep in the rear. Guards drive away the curious with rifle butts. Their own infantrymen whisper that the artillerymen are carrying some kind of hell pipes or pontoons. This isolation weighs on them. You are among your own, but you are a stranger. You are the bearer of a secret that weighs more than the launcher itself. The design of the BM-13 is a triumph of functionalism over aesthetics. The pack of rails is a welded truss of channels and beams. No hydraulics, only manual aiming drives. The turning mechanism is crude, requiring physical strength. To aim the launcher, you have to spin hand wheels, skinning your palms. Accuracy? A relative concept. The dispersion of shells at a distance of 3 kilometers is hundreds of meters along the front. But that is the point. This is not a sniper rifle. It is a shotgun with a caliber of 132 millimeters. The system's task is not to hit a tank, but to blanket the hectare of land where that tank is located. The asphalt ended long ago. Now there are only forest clearings. The column's speed drops to 10 kilometers per hour. Engines overheat. Drivers watch the temperature gauges with the same anxiety they watch the sky, where Messerschmitts could appear at any moment. Overheating means stopping. Stopping means falling behind. Falling behind means death. You don't abandon equipment here to walk away. Here, the equipment is you. You are welded to it by duty and 30 kilograms of explosives. Flerov rides in a passenger car, sometimes passing the column, sometimes letting it go ahead. He sees the faces of his men. They are tired.
Their hands shake after the salvo at Orsha.
They have just killed hundreds of people and now realize they have become a priority target for the entire Army Group Center. German intelligence works fast. Radio intercepts have already recorded panic in the Wehrmacht airwaves. Berlin demands explanations. What burned down the station? Where is this weapon? Who commands it? Behind every turn of the road, an ambush seems to lurk. The forest, which should offer cover, feels like a trap. Branches whip the windshields like lashes. Hear that? The driver of the second truck tenses. What? A hum. Sounds like aircraft. Don't jinx it. It's wind in the pines. No, that's an engine. Heavy. A Junkers is coming. The sound grows. The low, vibrating drone of bombers. They are looking for them. They are combing the grids, looking for the characteristic silhouettes of trucks with rails on the roof. The command is passed down the chain without radio, by voice and gestures. Air! Take cover!
Heavy Zis trucks, crushing bushes, drive off the clearing under the tree canopies. Engines are killed. Silence descends instantly. And in this silence, one can hear only the metal cooling and the German plane droning somewhere over the tops of the spruces. The men sit in the cabs without moving. The crew commander's hand rests on the detonator toggle. If the pilot spots them, if a strafing run begins, they won't run. They will blow up the trucks. Along with themselves. This is not heroism in the bookish sense. It is the hard, dry logic of war. The secret of the technology is more important than the crew's life, more important than the captain's life, more important than anything. Past. The gunner exhales as the drone recedes to the west. Past, echoes the driver, wiping sweat from his forehead with an oily sleeve. Crank it up. We need to make the crossing before dark. The key turns in the ignition. The starter whines with effort, turning the crankshaft. The engine sneezes and catches. Vibration runs through the frame again, resonating in the men's spines.
The column crawls out onto the road. The cargo of 200 tons of secrecy continues its journey. They have no final destination. Their route is the front line, which is constantly tearing and shifting. They have only orders, a full tank of gas, and a box of TNT under the seat. And the understanding that the next stop could be the last. Ahead is the unknown. Behind is the ash of Orsha. And between these 2 points are 7 trucks carrying the future of war in their beds. German infantry on the Eastern Front by July 1941 had already grown accustomed to the sounds of war. They distinguished the whistle of a falling 100-kilogram aerial bomb, the dry crack of a rifle shot, and the heavy, rhythmic rumble of Soviet howitzer artillery. Every sound had its own survival algorithm. Hear a whistle? Drop. Hear a rumble? Dig into the ground.
War was a predictable symphony of calibers,
where an experienced soldier had a chance to survive if he followed the rules. But what happened at Orsha, and then began repeating on other sectors of the front, broke this scheme. First came the sound. It was not a whistle and not a rumble. It was a howl. A low-frequency, vibrating, grinding noise, reminiscent of someone dragging a huge metal cabinet across glass, amplified thousands of times. It did not build up gradually. It crashed down all at once, filling all space, making teeth vibrate and gripping insides in an icy spasm. German soldiers in trenches looked up. Aircraft? No silhouettes in the sky. Tank breakthrough? The ground is shaking, but no engines are heard. This howl lasted only a few seconds, but the human psyche stretched them into hours. It was a psychoacoustic attack. The sound was born from the exhaust of powder gases through the nozzles of the rockets.
But for those sitting in the trenches, it was death itself howling. And then began a hell that could not be survived. A classic artillery shell usually buries itself in the ground upon impact, and only then does the fuse trigger. A significant part of the explosive energy and shrapnel goes into the earth, throwing up fountains of mud. This gives a chance. If you are lying at the bottom of a trench, the shrapnel will fly over you. The M13 shell worked differently. Because of its elongated shape and specific ballistics, it often arrived at the target at an angle and detonated almost instantly upon touching the surface. Sometimes fuses triggered even from brushing against tree branches. This changed the physics of destruction. The shrapnel didn't go into the sky or bury itself in the clay. It swept. Thousands of jagged pieces of red-hot metal flew horizontally at a height of 0.5 meter to 1 meter from the ground. This is called a continuous fragmentation kill zone. The dispersion speed is 800 meters per second. At such speed, a piece of metal weighing a few grams possesses the kinetic energy of a large caliber bullet. It doesn't just pierce flesh. It tears out chunks of the body, crushes bones into flour, tears off limbs. There was no salvation in open trenches. The shrapnel peaked over parapets, ricocheted off trench walls, creating a meat grinder inside the enclosed space. Infantry used to considering a trench a safe shelter found themselves in a trap. Those who tried to run died instantly. Those who lay down died a second later. It was then, in the first weeks of use, that the nickname was born: Stalin's organ. The Germans named the launcher this not out of a love for music. Visually, the pack of rails resembled the pipes of a church organ, but the main thing was the sound. The sound wave was of such density that blood flowed from the ears of many surviving but concussed soldiers. Eardrums could not withstand the pressure drop. Men went mad, not figuratively, but literally. Patients appeared in Wehrmacht field hospitals who did not have a scratch, but sat rocking from side to side, covering their ears with their hands, continuing to hear that howl in their heads. Panic reports began arriving at Army Group Center headquarters. Wehrmacht officers, men with pragmatic military educations, could not find terms to describe what was happening. In one intercepted report after a strike by Flerov's battery, the dry, bureaucratic language of the German report broke down into a description of the apocalypse. Personnel losses in Square 47, 100%. Equipment destroyed, tanks burning, guns melted. Psychological state of survivors in adjacent sectors critical. Soldiers refused to return to positions. The Russians used an automatic multi-barreled flamethrower cannon of an unknown system. The damage effect exceeds all known standards. Melted. That word frightened the command most of all. The high explosive action of the M13 shell was supplemented by monstrous heat. With a battalion salvo over an area of several hectares, a zone of continuous burning was created. The temperature at the epicenter of the explosions spiked to hundreds of degrees. Tire rubber flowed onto the ground in black puddles. Paint on armor boiled in bubbles. Aluminum engine parts lost their shape.
It was not just kinetic impact energy, it was a thermal storm. The Germans did not understand how to fight this. They had no analogues. Their 6-barreled Nebelwerfer mortars hit accurately but not far and lacked such fire density. The Russian Katyusha was not a precision weapon, it was an area weapon. It didn't need to hit a specific machine gun pillbox.
It simply erased the map grid where that pillbox was located, along with the forest, the grass, the topsoil, and the machine gunner himself. Fear of the organs became a strategic factor. A mere rumor that hell machines had appeared on a sector of the front was enough for the resilience of the German defense to drop. Regimental commanders demanded immediate air support at any suspicion of the characteristic roar of trucks. Hunting for rocket mortars became an obsession. For every destroyed specimen, they promised the Iron Cross, leave, and promotion. But catching a ghost was almost impossible. And on the ground, only consequences remained. A black, plowed desert where a forest had been an hour ago. Twisted carcasses of vehicles resembling skeletons of prehistoric beasts. And corpses. Corpses that could not be identified because the steel squall left nothing whole. It was the work not of a jeweler, but of a butcher. Crude, dirty, but absolutely effective physics of destruction, translated into the language of mass production of death. And the Germans began to understand this language all too well. The war of an artilleryman is usually a science of statics, choosing a position, digging caponiers, masking with nets, long hours of calculations with a slide rule and tablet. A howitzer battery can stand in one place for weeks, growing into the ground with shell casings and stew cans. But for Captain Flerov's men, statics became a synonym for death. They invented a new type of combat work, where geography changes faster than barrels cool down. Their tactics fit into 3 verbs: strike, pack up, vanish. It was not a war of positions, it was a war of timings. As soon as the last 16th shell leaves the rail, the position ceases to be a secret. 7 trucks releasing 112 rockets raise not just a cloud, but a real dust mushroom into the air. Dry earth kicked up by jet streams hangs in the air as a dense curtain, visible for 10 kilometers. For German artillery observers, this is the same as a red flare fired vertically upward. These are exact coordinates. This is an invitation to murder. Stand down! March! The command sounds even before the echo of explosions dies away in the distance. No assessment of results, no binoculars to watch the German trains burn. Every extra second at the position brings the probability of a retaliatory strike closer to 100%. German artillery works precisely. They have 3, maximum 4 minutes to calculate the square and cover it with return fire. Flerov has 2 minutes to leave that square. Here begins physical purgatory. The BM-13 unit in marching position and in combat position are 2 different machines. To fire, you must lower the jacks, unloading the springs, otherwise the swaying will throw off the aim. To leave, the jacks must be raised. There is no hydraulics. There is a screw thread, a crank, and the muscle power of 2 men for each support. Crews spin the handles at frantic speed, skinning hands, soaking the metal in sweat. The screws creak, reluctantly retracting into their sockets. The truck settles heavily onto its wheels. "Ready!" screams the breech operator, tossing the crank into the bed. "To the trucks!" The ZIS-6 is no race car. It is a heavy 3-axle truck with an engine of 73 horsepower. This is barely enough to pull the truck itself, the launcher, the crew, and that box of TNT. The driver mashes the gas pedal to the floor, squeezing every drop out of the engine. The machine roars, spinning wheels in the sand, slowly gaining speed. 5 kilometers per hour. 10.
15. It feels like they are crawling, not driving. They are not just running from artillery, they are running from aviation. The Luftwaffe has declared open season. German pilots received clear instructions. Look for trucks with rails on the roof. Destruction of such a machine earns an immediate reward. German Messerschmitts and Junkers patrol the roads, comb the clearings, hang over crossings. For a pilot, Flerov's column is a tasty prize. Defenseless, slow, packed with explosives. One lucky hit from an aircraft cannon, and the truck turns into a fireball visible from space. In the cab of the second truck, the driver, gripping the wheel, screams to his partner over the engine roar, "Watch the sky! Not the road, watch the sky!" The partner leans out the window to his waist, risking falling out over the bumps. The headwind hits his face with dust and gnats. His eyes scan the blue abyss. "Clear so far. Punch it, Sergei, punch it! It's overheating, damn it! Water's boiling! To hell with the water. If we stop, we burn!" The trucks fly along the dirt track, bouncing on roots. The launcher truss in the back shakes violently, clanging metal on metal. It seems that from this shaking the welds will burst, and the structure will collapse right onto the road. But Soviet welding holds. Rough, ugly, but reliable. Hit-and-run tactics turn their life into an endless race. They are ghosts of the roads. They appear from nowhere, bring down tons of fire on the enemy, and dissolve into the forests before the adversary can turn their tank turrets. The Germans call them phantom artillery. They cannot pinpoint the battery with sound-ranging stations. The sound of the salvo is too short and powerful. It overloads the instrument membranes. They cannot cover them with counter-battery fire. Shells fall into the void, ploughing up earth the trucks left 5 minutes ago. But luck is a depletable resource. One of the trucks lags, overheating. A jet of steam shoots from under the hood. The driver slams his fist on the dashboard, cursing through his teeth. "Come on, baby, come on. Not now." From above, a growing hum is heard, the thin, high-pitched sound of an aircraft engine on afterburner. "Messer, 9 o'clock!" The lookout's scream drowns out the engine noise. A predatory silhouette with yellow wingtips drops out of the clouds, entering a dive. The pilot sees a lone truck crawling along the road. He sees the strange construction in the bed. He understands what it is. The German's finger rests on the trigger. The ZIS driver does the only thing he can, sharply cranks the wheel right, directing the truck straight into the thick undergrowth, into the saving shadow of the trees. The truck tilts, cracking branches, breaking young birches with its bumper. A burst of cannon fire rakes the road, kicking up fountains of dust where the wheels were a second ago. Too late. The truck has disappeared under the canopy. The pilot misses, goes for a second pass, but the target is already lost in the green sea of foliage. In the forest, it is quiet. Only the ticking of the cooling engine and the heavy breathing of men. They are alive. One more time. Flerov gathers the truck commanders for a short briefing. Maps are spread right on the hood. Faces are gray with dust, eyes inflamed from lack of sleep. "Changing area. They spotted us here." The captain's finger traces a line across the map through the swamps. "We go here. There's no road, comrade captain. But no Germans either. We need corduroy roads there, comrade captain. We'll drown the trucks. We won't drown them. We'll carry them on our hands. But we can't use the roads anymore. The sky is closed." They become not just artillerymen. They become partisans on trucks. They learn to camouflage vehicles so that from 5 meters you can't tell them from a hazelnut bush. They learn to move at night, by touch, without headlights, orienting by a white rag tied to the tailgate of the truck ahead. They learn to sleep in snatches of 15 minutes sitting in the cabs. This race exhausts the equipment and the men. But it yields results. Every one of their salvos is a surprise, a terrible surprise that breaks the German offensive here and there. And every time a German general jabs a pointer at a map and screams at subordinates, demanding the destruction of those damned pipes, Captain Flerov's column is already shaking somewhere 30 kilometers from the strike site, fighting through another thicket to become a nightmare with no address once again. October 1941 brought an enemy feared no less than Guderian's tank wedges. The autumn mud season arrived. Roads that were arteries of life just yesterday turned into sticky, squelching traps. A mixture of clay, black earth, and icy water became that very general mud that equalized Wehrmacht technology and Red Army's stubbornness. But for Captain Flerov's experimental battery, this meant catastrophe. Operation Typhoon snapped shut like a steel trap. The Vyazma pocket. This is not just a point on a map. It is a giant meat grinder in which divisions and armies were being pulverized. There is no communication with command. The front as a continuous line no longer exists. There are only pockets of resistance and an ocean of German troops flowing toward Moscow. And in the middle of this chaos, 7 heavy vehicles loaded with a state secret are slowly dying in the autumn sludge. Movement now happens only at night. By day, the sky belongs to the Luftwaffe, but even at night, moving is almost impossible. The ZIS-6 trucks, overloaded with launchers and ammunition, get stuck to the axles every 100 meters. The elegant engineering idea, putting artillery on wheels, smashes against the harsh geography of a Russian swamp. Wheels spin helplessly, polishing liquid clay, throwing up fountains of mud, but the truck doesn't move. It sinks. Men turned into draft animals. Artillerymen, gunners, drivers, everyone harnesses themselves to cables. They push, pull, shove branches and their own greatcoats under the treads. Boots slip, hands go numb from the icy slush. Breath escapes in white clouds of steam. This is no longer a march. It is the agony of mechanics and human will. "Heave! Again!" The sergeant's hoarse scream drowns in the noise of rain and the strained whine of engines. Fuel. This word sounds scarier than encirclement. Tanks are running dry. There are no gas stations, no rear services. Every drop of gasoline is worth its weight in gold. Drivers siphon leftovers from the tanks of trucks destroyed on the roadsides, straining this murky slurry through rags, hoping the engines won't choke. Fuel consumption in such conditions is monstrous. 1 liter per kilometer, 2 liters, 3. The fuel gauge needles crawl inexorably toward zero. Captain Flerov understands. They are in the bag. The ring has closed. He unfolds the map on his knee, illuminating it with a captured flashlight shielded by his palm.
The map is useless. It shows defense lines that no longer exist. Villages marked as ours greet them with German machine gun fire. Forests that should offer cover are crawling with sabotage groups. He looks at his men. They have turned black from fatigue and dirt. Their eyes are sunken. They haven't slept for 3 days. But they do not abandon the trucks. They know that to abandon a Katyusha means to betray not only their oath, but common sense. To leave such technology to the enemy is a crime that cannot be atoned for, even by death. "Comrade Captain," the lieutenant's voice is quiet, almost a whisper. "Spas-Demensk is ahead. Scouts returned. Germans are there. And to the right? Germans too. Motorized infantry. Saw APCs. Behind? The tail of the column heard dogs barking and German speech. They are tracking us." Flerov is silent. He wipes his fogged glasses. The situation is crystal clear. They have been driven like wolves to the flags.
Room for maneuver has vanished. A narrow corridor remains through swamps and remote villages, leading nowhere. In the truck beds lies death in two guises: rockets for the enemy and boxes of TNT for themselves. The crews live with the realization that they are sitting on an electric chair, the switch for which is held by fate. The cold cuts to the bone, but not from the wind, but from this knowledge. Every time a truck spins its wheels, every time an engine sneezes, the heart skips a beat. If the vehicle stops for good, it will have to be blown up. "How many shells left?" Flerov asks dryly. "Enough for one partial salvo. Save them. Fire only at point-blank range. Only for sure." Hit-and-run tactics no longer work because there is nowhere to run. Now it is a race for survival, where the finish line is the front line, which is moved east by hundreds of kilometers. They are alone. In this entire huge, cold night filled with alien troops, there are only 7 Russian trucks and a handful of men who have decided not to surrender. The forest presses with silence. It is a deceptive silence. Clanking treads and foreign speech hide within it. Psychological tension reaches the limit. It seems every tree is looking at them through a sniper scope. Soldiers flinch at the crack of a broken branch. Nerves are worn thin like old wires. In the cab of the lead truck, the driver and commander do not speak. There is nothing to talk about. Everything is understood without words. They listen to the engine. While it runs, there is hope. While the wheels turn, they are alive. "If we hit a wall," the driver starts, staring into the darkness past the hood. "I know," the commander cuts him off, putting a hand on the cold body of the detonator. "Don't lose your nerve. We'll do it clean." They approach the village of Bogatyr. The name sounds like a mockery. There are no Bogatyrs, mythical heroes, here. Only exhausted men and iron at the limit of endurance. The darkness is so thick you could cut it with a knife. The rain doesn't stop for a minute, washing away tracks, but not washing away fatigue. Flerov feels it in his skin. The climax is near. The noose has tightened completely. There are no more detour options, no saving clearings. Ahead is a blockade. Behind is pursuit. The logic of war has driven them into a dead end from which there is only one exit, vertically upward, along with smoke and flame. But as long as there is even 1 meter of ground under the wheels, they will crawl. Because they are artillerymen. Their god is ballistics, and it does not forgive stopping. "Forward," the captain commands, quietly. Lights out. The column pulls into the blackness of the night, toward its fate. Engines run at low RPMs so as not to make noise, but this sound in the night forest still seems like thunder. 7 seconds of hell that they gifted the enemy all these months are now returning to them as 7 hours of waiting for the end. The night of October 6th to 7th, 1941. The village of Bogatyr. A name on a map is just a set of letters, but in reality, it is a narrow bottleneck squeezed between swamps and forest. The column enters the village. Quiet. Too quiet for the front zone. The darkness is such that drivers see only the marker lights of the truck ahead, and barely that. 7 ZIS-6 trucks creep along the main street, slicing the mud with their wheels. Engines work at half strength, trying not to break the silence, which is already stretched like a string before snapping. The trap snaps shut instantly. First, the sound. The sharp pop of a squib in the sky. An illumination flare flares up over the column. Deathly white magnesium light floods the street, snatching from the darkness the silhouettes of trucks, the glint of wet metal rails, and the frozen faces of men. Following the light comes the lead. German machine guns strike from two sides, stitching through the wooden sides of cabs and canvas covers with dagger fire. Tracers scribe lines of fire, biting into the equipment. Glass shatters, spraying shards into drivers' faces. Radiators are pierced. Boiling water gushes onto the ground, mixing with mud. It is an ambush. A complete, expertly organized ambush. The Germans were waiting. They knew the route. "To battle!" Captain Flerov's voice overrides the rattle of machine guns. "Direct fire!" In artillery manuals, there is no concept of firing rockets at point-blank range. The BM-13 was created for strikes over the horizon, at areas, at distances of kilometers. But manuals were written in peacetime. Now the laws of physical survival apply. Crews tumble out of cabs straight into the mud, under bullets. Someone falls and doesn't get up, cut down by a burst. The survivors crawl to the jacks. The trucks need to be turned. On the narrow village street, 7-meter trucks struggle like elephants in a china shop. Drivers wrench gear levers, reversing, breaking fences, crushing front gardens. Trucks position themselves across the road, blocking each other's path but clearing sectors of fire. "Lower trusses! Parallel to the ground!" The screws of the lifting mechanisms whine. The guide rails, usually looking at the sky, lower down. Now they are not howitzers. Now they are giant shotguns aimed point-blank at German lines emerging from houses. The Germans see these strange contraptions. They stop firing for a second, stunned. They want to take this miracle weapon intact. Shouts in German are heard. "Don't shoot at the trucks! Take the crew!" This is their mistake. This second of delay costs them their lives. "Fire!" Flerov doesn't wait for a full battery salvo. Each truck shoots on its own as soon as it is ready. The first unit shudders. Jets of superheated gas strike the ground, raising clouds of steam and ash. Rockets leave the rails not in a ballistic arc, but almost horizontally. At a distance of 200 meters, the ballistics of the M13 rocket turn into absurdity. Heavy cigars packed with TNT slam into cabins, sheds, German APCs, without even gaining maximum speed. But the kinetic energy is enough to punch through a log wall. Fuses trigger inside the structures. The village of Bogatyr turns into a branch of hell. Explosions of heavy, high explosives smash houses to splinters. Burning logs fly apart like matches. German infantry, which was already celebrating victory, finds itself in the epicenter of a fire tornado. Those who were on the street are swept away by the shock wave and stuffed with shrapnel. Those hiding in houses are buried under rubble. But this is agony. Ammunition runs out instantly. They had only a few shells per barrel. The last rocket rumble fades, leaving behind the crackle of fires and the screams of the wounded. The battery has done its job. The enemy is thrown back, but not destroyed. The ring is not broken. Machine guns start firing from the darkness again. Now the Germans aren't sparing the equipment. They realized taking a trophy won't work. They want to destroy everything. The moment of truth arrives. The one for which 30-kilogram boxes of TNT hang on the frames. Flerov is wounded. He presses a hand to his side, feeling warm, sticky blood. But his mind works clearly as a chronometer. He goes around the trucks. In the firelight, his figure looks like a black shadow. "Prepare for demolition," he wheezes. "Fuses!" The electric detonation circuit might be severed by bullets. The most reliable way is the fuse cord. Crew commanders open the boxes. The smell of raw explosives mixes with burning. Hands tremble, but do the familiar work. Insert detonator. Light the cord. Burn time: seconds. This is not just destruction of equipment. It is suicide in the name of a secret. The crews have no escape route. Behind is a swamp. Ahead is a wall of fire. Some soldiers take out grenades. Others reload personal weapons. They will accept battle here, by the wheels of their trucks. "Blow it!" Flerov screams, standing by the lead unit. He does not go to cover. He stays to make sure. The fuse hisses, snake crawling inside the box of TNT. The explosion of 30 kilograms of TNT, amplified by remaining gasoline in the tanks and unified rockets, is not a flash. It is a rupture of reality. The ZIS-6 truck simply ceases to exist as a material object. The cab is torn to pieces. The heavy half-ton engine flies tens of meters like a stone from a sling. The rail guides are twisted into spirals, torn at the welds, turning into shapeless scrap. The blast wave topples telegraph poles and rips roofs off surviving houses. The second truck detonates next. The third. The earth shudders as if in an earthquake. A series of monstrous blows merges into one continuous roar that blocks ears even kilometers away. Fireballs rise into the black sky, illuminating the forest with eerie crimson light. Captain Ivan Flerov disappears in this flash. His body, like the bodies of many of his men, becomes part of this final, most terrible salvo. He accomplished the main task. The secret is kept. The enemy gets nothing but mangled, melted metal in which it is no longer possible to recognize the formidable weapon. Not a single intact rail, not a single intact shell. Only smoking pits and pieces of iron scattered in the mud. When German submachine gunners, deafened and concussed, finally dare to approach the explosion site, they find only a graveyard of technology. Burning skeletons of trucks resemble skeletons of prehistoric monsters. The heat is such that approaching closer than 5 meters is impossible. The air hangs heavy with the smell of burnt rubber, TNT, and burnt flesh. A German officer looks at a twisted knot of rail sticking out of the ground. He kicks it with a boot. The metal rings, cooling. The officer understands. They lost this battle. They killed the men, but they let the technology slip. The ghost vanished, slamming the door loudly. And this slam will ring in the ears of the survivors all the way to Berlin. Captain Flerov's battery died, but the Katyusha remained alive to return with thousands of new barrels. 1942, Stalingrad. The geography of war has shrunk to a narrow strip of land along the right bank of the Volga. There are no more forests to hide in, and no roads for maneuver. There are only ruins, concrete, and the river at the back. Captain Flerov's death a year ago did not bury the weapon. It only gave time for its proliferation. Instead of 7 experimental vehicles, regiments of Guards mortars now work. But in Stalingrad, the very philosophy of their use changes. General Trikov and Colonel Erokin, commanding the artillery, face a tactical dead end. The distance between Soviet and German positions has shrunk to a grenade throw. 50 meters, 30, sometimes the thickness of a single brick wall. Using classic heavy artillery is impossible. The risk of hitting one's own is too great. Surgical precision is needed, but Katyushas don't have it. Katyushas have only an area of destruction, and then they decide to change the filling of death. New ammunition arrives at the front. The indices on the invoices mean nothing to a layman, but for a chemist, it is a death sentence to everything living. Thermite shells. Inside the warhead is not just explosives. There is a mixture of aluminum powder and iron oxide. Simple school chemistry elevated to the absolute of industrial murder. Upon ignition, this mixture does not explode. It burns. Combustion temperature, 2,200 degrees Celsius. For reference, steel melts at 1,500 degrees. Concrete crumbles and flows at 2,000. Human flesh evaporates instantly, leaving only a greasy black trace of carbon on the stones. BM-13 units stand on the left bank of the Volga in safety. Their task is to lob death across the river, supporting the garrison clinging to the city ruins. The flight trajectory of shells is steep, almost vertical. They go into the gray autumn sky to crash down a few seconds later on streets the Germans already considered their own. The grain elevator area, a giant concrete tower dominating the city. It is a fortress inside which the remnants of Soviet naval infantry are trapped. Germans are crawling out of every crack like ants. They bring up assault guns, flamethrowers. The situation is critical. The Marines transmit coordinates by radio.
These are not enemy coordinates. These are their own coordinates. Volga, this is granite. Germans on the first floor. Germans in the warehouses. Calling fire on myself. Square 1240. Box is full. Granite, this is Volga. Confirm. That is your sector. Confirming. Burn it. Faster or we get overrun. On the left bank, the battery commander looks at the map. Square 1240 is the elevator itself and the adjacent territory. He knows what thermite is. He knows what is about to happen. But an order is an order. Site 108, Tube 20. Thermite. Salvo! That howl again, but now it sounds different. It reflects off the water, amplified by the acoustics of the river valley. Dozens of rockets streak over the Volga, leaving smoky trails. The impact of thermite shells is not like high explosives. There is no shattering roar that bursts eardrums. There is a sound like a giant sigh, turning into the hiss of a hot skillet splashed with water. Shells burst in the air and on impact, scattering thousands of burning elements. This is not fire in the usual sense. It is liquid light. Drops of molten thermite burn through helmets like paper. They burn through the armor of German APCs, flowing inside the vehicle and igniting ammunition and fuel. Putting out thermite is impossible. Water instantly breaks down into hydrogen and oxygen, only intensifying the burning. Sand doesn't help. The mixture burns through the sand, turning it into glass. The street around the elevator turns into a river of fire. Asphalt ignites. German infantry that was preparing to storm a second ago falls into a trap. Men turn into living torches. They run, trying to beat down the flames, but the flame eats into the meat. Screams are drowned out by the roar of the fire. The air burns out. There isn't enough oxygen to breathe. Lungs are scorched with every breath of superheated suspension. "Hit confirmed," the spotter screams into the handset. "Burning!" Everything is burning. Tanks stopped. Infantry retreating. The view from the elevator embrasures is apocalyptic. Around the tower, a sea of fire rages, in which the German offensive melts. Soviet fighters barricaded on the upper floors feel the heat through concrete walls. But the thermite cut off the enemy. The wall of fire created a barrier no living organism can pass. The BM-13 in Stalingrad ceased to be just artillery. It became a tool of terraforming. It changed the landscape, turning city blocks into lunar landscapes covered with a glassy crust of slag. In Chuikov's headquarters, they understand this is cruel. Striking with such shells in urban housing means leaving no stone standing. But Stalingrad is not a place for humanism. It is a place where the physics of destruction dictates the conditions of survival. "Shift fire," Colonel Irokin commands. "Square 13-0, concentration of equipment in the ravine, reloading." Loaders, tearing fingernails, drag heavy shells slippery with grease, 50 kilograms each. Reloading standard, 5 minutes. They do it in 3. Adrenaline replaces strength. They know that there, across the river, their comrades are waiting for this fire like salvation. New salvo, new groans of metal. German tankers in the ravine hear this sound. They know what it is. Panic in the German tank radio waves gives way to animal screams. Hatches slam shut, engines roar, trying to get vehicles out of the kill zone. But treads have no chance against rocket speed. Shells cover the ravine. The effect of enclosed space amplifies the temperature. A Panzer III tank is not penetrated by shrapnel, but when a chunk of burning thermite falls on the engine compartment, the engine dies. Rubber tires on the road wheels melt into black sludge. The crew suffocates in smoke. They open hatches to breathe and let in the heat of a furnace. The Battle of Stalingrad grinds people, but it also forges new tactics. The rolling barrage. Infantry support with a wall of explosions. If previously artillery worked on points, now Katyushas work on areas, burning out corridors for counteroffensives. At night, the glow over Stalingrad is visible for 40 kilometers. It isn't just houses burning. It is iron, earth, and the history of the old war burning, giving way to a new era, the era of total technical destruction. And in the center of this bonfire are simple rails made of channel iron, welded to truck frames, sending their red-hot greetings across the great river. July 1943, the Kursk Bulge. The steppe near Prokhorovka is not just burning, it is vibrating. The heat is such that the air shimmers over armor, distorting silhouettes. Dust, fine, acrid Loess dust, clogs everything. Nostrils, engine filters, gun breeches. Visibility drops to 100 meters. But this is not fog. It is a suspension of soil lifted into the sky by thousands of treads and explosions. Here on the southern face of the bulge, the Wehrmacht plays its main trump card: heavy Tiger tanks. 56 tons of German steel, 88 millimeters of caliber, Zeiss optics allowing kills from 2 kilometers. For Soviet anti-tank artillery, this is a problem. 45mm shells bounce off the Tiger's frontal armor like peas off a wall. Even 76mm Beast Slayer guns are forced to let these monsters in to pistol range to have a chance at penetration. The German tank wedge, Panzerkeil, moves inexorably. Heavy machines form the tip, medium tanks and APCs fan out behind them. It is the perfect breakthrough machine. It seems physically impossible to stop this avalanche of metal. Infantry in trenches presses into the bottom, feeling with their backs how the earth trembles. It is trembling not from engines, but from the weight of approaching death. And then a variable is introduced into the battle equation that is not written in any German tactical manual. The front commander's order is dry and harsh. Use guards mortars on armored concentrations. It sounds like madness. The M13 rocket is a high-explosive shell. It is created to tear apart manpower and destroy wooden fortifications. It has no armor-piercing core. It is not shaped charge. By the laws of ballistics, it cannot penetrate 100 millimeters of Krupp-cemented steel. But the physics of explosion has its nuances. A division of Katyushas deploys right in the field, in high wormwood. No camouflage, there is no time. Gunners spin hand wheels, lowering rail trusses to minimum elevation. They will fire almost point blank, but on a parabolic trajectory. The task is to cover the area where the steel herd crawls. Reference point 2, Round Grove. Distance, 3,000. Rapid fire. The command drowns in the roar of tank diesels coming toward them. Salvo. The sky over Prokhorovka tears in half.
Hundreds of fiery tails go into the dusty murk. Seconds later, the horizon disappears into a solid wall of explosions. What happens when a shell weighing 42 kilograms, carrying 5 kilograms of explosives, hits a 50-ton tank? It doesn't penetrate the armor. It does something worse. The shock wave from the explosion of such an amount of TNT on the armor surface works like a giant blacksmith's hammer. Welds fail. If a shell hits the turret or near the ring, the monstrous pressure rips the turret off its mounts. A heavy steel structure weighing several tons shifts a couple of centimeters, jamming dead. The turning mechanism turns into a mess of gears. The tank, which a second ago was a lethal machine, turns into an immobile pillbox with a fixed sector of fire. But what happens inside is even scarier. Armor stops shrapnel, but it transmits sound waves and vibration perfectly. The crew inside a Tiger is in a closed steel box. With a direct HE hit on the turret, men don't get shrapnel wounds. They get behind-armor concussion. A blow of such force that blood sprays from ears and noses. Eyes are flooded with a red veil. Internal organs receive a hydrodynamic shock. The driver loses consciousness from the overload, collapsing chest first onto the levers. The loader falls to the floor of the fighting compartment, unable to tell up from down. The tank is intact outside, but inside it is dead. The crew is alive, but incapacitated to a vegetative state. "It's a hit!" screams the gunner, pressing binoculars to his eyes. "Look, it twisted his head!" In the dust cloud, the lead Tiger is seen jerking and freezing. Its turret looks somewhere sideways and down, like a broken neck. Another shell explodes under a track. Massive links designed for off-road disintegrate. The drive sprocket is torn out with flesh. Inertia spins the tank, exposing its thin side to anti-tank guns. This is not sniper shooting. This is stunning fish with dynamite over an area. The German formation breaks. Tanks start to scatter. They go blind. Explosions sweep away external equipment, antennas, periscopes, sights. The German tank battalion commander loses control. In his headphones, there is only static and screams for help. The coordinated Wehrmacht machine, working as a single organism, falls apart into separate, frightened crews trapped in steel boxes amidst a firestorm. Another salvo, before they recover. The second strike finishes off the attack logistics. APCs with infantry following the tanks simply vanish. The light armor of Hanomag's caves inward from the blast wave, turning the troops into mince. Infantry stripped of armor hits the dirt, but there is no salvation. Shrapnel mows down the wormwood along with the men. And in that moment, when the German wedge is broken and disoriented, through the smoke screen created by Katyusha explosions, Soviet T-34s go into a counterattack. It looks like a scene from the underworld. Out of a wall of black smoke and fire burst green machines with red stars on their turrets. They close with the Tigers to ramming distance. Now they have the advantage. The German giants are concussed, their optics smashed, their infantry cut off. Soviet tankers shoot the flanks of the beasts point blank, exploiting the chaos created by the rocket mortars. In the cab of the BM-13, there is a smell of burnt paint. The rails are red hot from the rate of fire. "How do you like that, stray cats?" grins the gun commander, wiping soot from his face. Choke on it? It was a turning point, not only in the battle, but in psychology. The myth of the Tiger's invulnerability was dispelled not only by armor-piercing slugs, but by the brute, concentrated force of explosives.
It turned out that even the most perfect German steel cannot cancel the laws of physics. If you hit it with a big enough hammer,
the mechanism inside breaks, and Katyushas became that hammer. On the field near Prokhorovka, hundreds of vehicles burn out. Black smoke rises vertically into the windless sky. Among them stand tigers, outwardly almost intact, without holes in the armor, but with torn hatches, twisted barrels, and dead crews inside. Monuments to what happens when engineering precision meets the absolute fury of area destruction. The rocket crews pack up. Their work here is done. They blew the enemy's mind, literally and figuratively. April 1945, Zilo Heights. The final line before the beast's lair. Here, war finally loses the features of a duel or tactical maneuver. It turns into pure distilled violence on an industrial scale. The evolution that began with 7 lonely trucks near Orsha reached its logical and monstrous peak. If in 1941 the Katyusha was a rare predator, now it is a pack covering the horizon. In the forests before the Oder stands not a battery, not even a regiment. An entire army of rocket artillery is concentrated here. The density of barrels per kilometer of front exceeds all conceivable standards of military science. The Germans on the heights know what awaits them, but knowledge does not save from a tsunami. 3 a.m. Berlin time. The darkness before dawn is dense, cold. In this darkness hide 400 launchers aligned in one giant line. These are not only the old BM-13 Onzi IS-6 or American Studebaker chassis. They are also the heavy BM-31, nicknamed Andryusha, which hurl 300-kilogram shells into the sky straight from wooden frames standing on the ground. The silence is deceptive. In it, one can hear the breathing of thousands of men and the ticking of second hands on commanders' watches. Synchronization is the key word of this night. The salvo must not be sequential, but simultaneous. The blow must be singular to overload reality. Key to start! The command travels through telephone wires to hundreds of cabs at once. Turn of the circuit key. Spark. Roar. This is not the sound of a shot. This is the sound of the atmosphere tearing apart. 6,000 rockets go into the sky within 1 minute. Imagine a freight train loaded with explosives slamming into the air at supersonic speed. The sky over the Oder instantly changes color. It becomes not just red, it becomes blindingly white from thousands of working solid-fuel engines. Night disappears. Shadows disappear. Only light and a roar remain, from which water vibrates in the river and earth crumbles in trenches kilometers away. The physics of a massive strike differs qualitatively from a single salvo. When thousands of warheads detonate simultaneously on an area of several square kilometers, a shockwave superposition effect occurs.
They don't cancel each other out.
They sum up. A zone of overpressure arises, where air turns into a solid body. The first line of German defense on the Zilo Heights simply ceases to exist as an engineering structure. No trenches remain there. No bunkers remain there. Concrete pillboxes designed for direct howitzer hits are wrenched from the earth like rotten stumps. Multi-ton ceilings crack. Earth flies up tens of meters, mixing with barbed wire, mines, weapons, and bodies of soldiers. This is no longer war of infantry against infantry. It is a geological cataclysm caused by pressing a button. Following the fire squall, Soviet command switches on 140 powerful anti-aircraft searchlights to blind the enemy and light the attack. But this plan clashes with the consequences of the Katyusha's work. The wall of smoke, dust, and soot raised by the explosions is so dense that searchlight beams bog down in it, unable to pierce the gloom. The sun, when it should have risen, is not visible. Day begins in twilight, created by a suspension of 1,000,000 tons of plowed soil. In the bunkers of the second line of defense, where the shock wave reached weakened, German officers try to restore communication. There is no communication. Wires evaporated. The radio ether is jammed with static crackle from air ionization. The Berlin garrison, sitting in the rear, feels this blow through the soles of their boots. The trembling of the earth reaches the basements of the Reichstag. It is a psychological knockout. "Report the situation!" screams a German general into the field's telephone handset. "There is no situation, Herr General," answers a voice from the front line, full of animal horror. The first line is gone. The landscape has changed. We don't see landmarks. We see only a wall of fire coming at us. Dialogues of Soviet artillerymen at this time are short and technical. No jubilation, only recording of parameters. Pack empty.
Reloading. Correction 0. Working on areas. Barrels overheated. Cooling 2 minutes. They look at their handiwork without emotion. They are too tired from 4 years of war. For them, this fiery hell is just a quality job done. 6,000 shells delivered to the addressee. Acceptance acts not required. The result is visible to the naked eye. Where fortifications stood, there is now a flat, smoking field, suitable for tank army passage. It is a symphony of destruction, in which the Katyusha plays the first violin. The roar is such that men communicate with gestures. Vocal cords are useless. But words aren't needed. The language of force is understood by all. When infantry and tanks go into attack through the plowed zone, they see surreal pictures. Enemy tanks flipped upside down by the blast wave without a direct hit. Trees stripped of branches and bark standing like white skeletons. And silence. Eerie silence in sectors where thousands of armed men sat an hour ago.
There is no one to resist. Those who didn't die from shrapnel died from barotrauma or went mad from the sound that split the sky. The Berlin operation became the apotheosis of the jet age. Quantity turned into the quality of absolute destruction. Flerov's battery near Orsha showed that it was possible. The army near Berlin showed that it was inevitable. Stalin's organs played their final chord, and the notes of this music were cast in cast iron and TNT. The road to Berlin was not breached. It was scorched to the ground, cleared by a fiery bulldozer that had no brakes. May 1945 brought silence. For artillerymen, it was the strangest sensation, the absence of recoil. For 4 years the air trembled, the earth vibrated, and ears got used to the constant pressure of the sound wave. And suddenly, a vacuum. Silence in which birdsong is heard seems unreal, deceptive, as if before the most terrible final salvo that never came. But the war ended. The time of memory archaeology and engineering analysis began. The story of Captain Flerov's experimental battery did not end in the fiery cauldron near the village of Bogatyr. It just went into the ground to sprout through the decades. Trackers who came to those forests years later were looking for metal. They looked for casings, helmets, vehicle skeletons. But what they found at the site of the last battle did not fit the usual picture of a battlefield. The explosion of 30 kilograms of TNT on every truck, multiplied by the detonation of rocket fuel, left no large fragments. The ZIS-6 trucks evaporated. Metal was torn into molecules, pulverized, mixed with earth. It seemed nature itself tried to erase the scar left by 7 seconds of hell. But the physics of the explosion left one unique monument, a monument no sculptor could conceive. Deep in the forest, on the edge of that very clearing, stands an old aspen. thick, gnarled, survivor of dozens of winters.
From its trunk, at the height of a man, sticks a rusty, mangled piece of metal. It is not a shell fragment. It is a fragment of the guide rail of a BM-13 launcher. The blast wave in 1941 possessed such kinetic energy that it hurled this I-beam profile like a spear. A blunt, heavy piece of steel struck the then-young tree with such force that it stitched right through it, but didn't break it. The iron got stuck in living flesh. Years passed. The tree grew, bark closed over the wound, wood fibers enveloped the metal, squeezing it in a vise. Steel grew into wood. The living consumed the dead. This is the best illustration of the battery's fate. The iron of war became part of the landscape, part of the very earth it defended by the method of total burning. This piece of rail will tell an engineer more than volumes of reports. It speaks of the brisance of the explosive that blew the launcher to dust so the enemy wouldn't get a blueprint or a screw. It speaks of the fact that the secret was kept at the price of absolute self-destruction. People survived. 46 men came out to their own from that hell near Bogatyr. Exhausted, concussed, having passed through swamps and German rears. Their path wasn't strewn with flowers. Escaping encirclement always raised questions from the special department. Where is the equipment? Why are you alive? Why didn't you shoot yourselves? The secret classification hung over them like a sword of Damocles for many years. They signed non-disclosure agreements. They stayed silent about how Orsha burned and how the earth melted near Vyazma. The feet of Captain Ivan Flerov remained in the shadows for a long time. In casualty lists, he was listed as missing in action. In the military bureaucracy of those years, this was a slippery formulation, often bordering on suspicion. They didn't build monuments to him. They didn't write about him in newspapers.
The country needed living heroes, or dead martyrs with a clear grave. And Flerov had no grave. He had a crater, overgrown with grass. Justice, like an artillery shell, sometimes flies long, but hits accurately. Only in 1995, half a century after the victory, was Captain Ivan Andreevich Flerov awarded the title of Hero of the Russian Federation. Posthumously. Recognition that his decision to blow up the battery was not an act of desperation, but an act of supreme professional responsibility. He didn't just die. He fulfilled his combat mission to the last millisecond of his life. But Flerov's true legacy is not stars on shoulder boards and not granite slabs. His legacy is in the evolution of engineering thought. The BM-13 did not fade into history. It became the progenitor of an entire class of weaponry. Look at modern multiple-launch rocket systems. The BM-21, Grad. 40 rails instead of 16. Full salvo time, 20 seconds.
Kill zone, 14.5 hectares.
Uragan. Smirch. Tornado. Calibers grow. 300 millimeters. Firing range goes beyond 100 kilometers. Smart munitions that seek targets themselves. Cluster blocks covering airfields. But at the heart of these complex digital complexes lies the same simple, crude, and effective idea Flerov tested near Orsha. The idea of a sudden, massed area strike. The idea of mobility. Arrived, erased coordinates from the map, left. The genetic code of the Katyusha lives in every launch tube of a modern MLRS. The principle of rails on a truck turned out to be eternal, like the Kalashnikov rifle. Technologies changed. Instead of primitive sights, satellite navigation. Instead of manual jacks, hydraulics. Instead of blind area fire, corrected trajectories. But the essence remains the same. This is not a weapon for duels. This is a weapon for changing reality.
A weapon that reminds the enemy.
You can hide from a bullet. You can take cover from a bomb, but you cannot hide from a mathematically calculated firestorm. That old aspen in the forest near Vyazma still stands. The rusty rail slowly decays under rain and snow, oxidizing and returning to the earth in orange streaks. But the memory of metal is more durable than human memory. 7 seconds of the first salvo near Orsha stretched into decades. The echo of that howl that drove German soldiers mad sounds today on proving grounds. It is the sound of heavy work, the sound of physics placed in the service of defense. War is dirt, blood, and burnt iron. There is no romance in it. There are only tasks and ways to solve them. Captain Flerov and his team solved their task. They turned an experimental machine into a legend, and their own lives into payment for that legend. They didn't ask for glory. They just made it so that for 7 seconds the sky turned to fire, and the earth under the enemy's feet ceased to be solid. And if you ever find yourself in a quiet forest and see a tree with a metal scar, don't look for beautiful words. Just be silent. Silence is the best reward for those who spent their whole lives in the roar of jet engines. Secret kept, targets destroyed, crew finished work.